The diner smelled of grease and old coffee, the kind of place where truckers came to rest their weary legs and townsfolk passed the time over chipped mugs. Marcus Green sat in the corner booth, his thin frame nearly swallowed by the cracked leather seat. In front of him was a single plate, steaming, fragrant, and precious. It was not just food, it was the reward of an entire week's labor. 14 years old, Marcus had worked himself ragged to earn that meal. He had raked leaves under the scorching sun, carried buckets of water for neighbors, and even polished shoes outside the general store until his fingers turned black with polish. Every coin, every crumpled bill he collected, had gone into the small tin box he kept hidden beneath his mattress. Each day after school he would drop in another coin, hearing the faint clink as though it were a promise. For Marcus, that plate of food was more than meatloaf and mashed potatoes, it was proof that his sweat and sacrifice could bring him something warm and filling in a life mostly ruled by hunger. As he picked up the fork, his stomach growled fiercely, almost rebuking him for waiting so long. He could already imagine the first bite melting against his tongue, filling the void that gnawed inside him. But before he could lift the fork to his mouth, his eyes wandered, and they landed on the couple sitting 2 tables away. They were old, far older than Marcus' late father had ever been allowed to become. The man's back was stooped, his shoulders trembling slightly as if the weight of years had bent him beyond repair. The woman beside him was pale, her hands clasped tightly in her lap, her eyes lowered to the empty table. They had no food, no coffee, nothing but silence. Marcus' fork lingered in the air, his hunger wrestling with something deeper, quieter. He watched the couple lean closer to one another, whispering words too faint for him to hear. He saw the man pat her frail hand as though trying to comfort her pride, though Marcus knew well enough the look of quiet shame when someone could not afford even the simplest meal. He looked back at his own plate. The steam rose in thin curls, carrying the scent of garlic and butter. His stomach twisted violently. Every nerve in his body screamed to eat, to claim the meal he had earned. But then he remembered his father's voice, a voice carried like an echo through memory. Real strength isn't what you keep, son. It's what you give. Marcus hesitated. His fingers trembled around the fork. He could feel the heat of the food radiating toward his face, taunting him. The boy closed his eyes, breathed deeply, and pushed the plate gently across the table. He rose from his seat, carried the meal carefully toward the couple, and set it before them without a word. The old man looked up, his eyes brimming with disbelief. His lips trembled as he whispered, "Thank you." The woman's hand flew to her mouth, and her eyes filled with tears so quickly that Marcus almost looked away. "It's yours," Marcus said softly, forcing a small smile despite the ache in his belly. "Please." The couple stared at him as though they were looking at something holy, something impossible. Marcus nodded once, then turned on his heel and walked toward the door. The bell above it jingled weakly as he stepped out into the cold night. Behind him, the couple leaned over the plate like it was a treasure, their gratitude hanging heavy in the air. Outside, the air cut against Marcus' face, sharp and bitter. He shoved his hands into his pockets, feeling the rough fabric of the coat that had once belonged to his father. Hunger twisted inside him, sharper now without the promise of relief. Yet even as his stomach rumbled, a strange warmth flickered in his chest. His walk home was long, the streetlights buzzing faintly overhead. He passed shuttered shops, stray cats darting into alleys, and houses where light leaked warmly from curtained windows. Each window reminded him of what his home lacked: comfort, security, fullness. The Green household sat at the very edge of town, a small house with peeling paint and a roof patched more times than he could count. Inside, bills piled high on the counter, mocking his mother's weary attempts to keep pace. Their cupboards meanwhile were nearly bare, a few cans, a sack of rice, some stale bread. His mother, Evelyn Green, worked double shifts at the textile factory, often coming home too tired to eat, too tired even to talk. When Marcus slipped quietly inside, the house greeted him with silence. He tiptoed past the living room, where the sofa sagged from years of use, and into his small room. The hunger gnawed so fiercely he almost regretted giving away the food. But when he lay down on his thin mattress and closed his eyes, he whispered to himself the same words again. Real strength isn't what you keep, it's what you give. His father, gone since Marcus was 9, had lived by those words. A man who had worked himself sick in the fields, who had given every ounce of his strength to his family until the day life simply took him. Marcus still remembered the way his father's hands looked, rough, calloused, cracked from labor. To Marcus, those hands had always seemed invincible. Until the day they weren't. Now it was his turn to carry the weight. His mother needed him. The memory of his father demanded it. As he drifted toward sleep, his stomach twisting painfully, Marcus found a strange peace settling over him. He had nothing to eat, but he had something far more powerful, the knowledge that, in a world starved for kindness, he had given something away. What he could not know, as his eyes grew heavy that night, was that his act of quiet sacrifice had been witnessed. Not just by the couple whose dignity he had restored, but by someone whose presence would soon knock on his door and change his life forever. The night outside stretched cold and merciless. But dawn was coming. And with it, fate was preparing to test whether kindness truly multiplies. The first rays of dawn crept timidly through the cracked blinds of Marcus' room. He stirred beneath the thin blanket, his body still heavy from the weight of hunger. His dreams had been restless, filled with flashes of the diner, the old couple's teary eyes, and the scent of food he had never tasted. A knock shattered the silence. It was firm, deliberate, echoing through the small house like a summons. Marcus sat up instantly, heart pounding. Visitors never came at this hour. He pushed his bare feet into shoes with worn soles and hurried toward the front door. His mother, Evelyn, emerged from the kitchen in her faded nightdress, worry etched across her tired face. "Who could that be?" she whispered, her voice groggy yet tense. Marcus reached for the handle, pulled the door open and froze. Standing on the porch was a man who seemed carved out of another world entirely. Tall, broad-shouldered, dressed in a charcoal coat that gleamed faintly under the morning sun. His shoes were polished to a mirror shine. The air of power clung to him, the kind Marcus had only glimpsed in the business magazines at the library. Behind the man stood the same old couple from the diner. Their faces were transformed, glowing with gratitude, alive with something like joy. "Marcus Green?" the stranger asked, his voice steady, deep, and commanding. Marcus nodded hesitantly. "Yes, sir." The man's lips curved into a faint smile. "My name is William Carter." The name struck Marcus like a hammer. He knew it, everyone in the state did. William Carter, the self-made millionaire, owner of half the textile plants, real estate developments and transport companies in the region. A man whose photographs often appeared in the newspapers beside words like philanthropy and fortune. Carter looked Marcus up and down, his eyes pausing on the patched coat and the too-thin frame. Then he glanced over Marcus' shoulder at Evelyn, who was staring in disbelief, one trembling hand pressed against her chest. "May we come in?" Carter asked politely. Evelyn blinked and stepped aside, her voice caught in her throat. Of course." The little house, usually so quiet, suddenly seemed too small for the weight of their presence. The couple shuffled in, their hands clasped tightly together. Carter followed, carrying an envelope tucked neatly under his arm. He moved with the kind of authority that made the walls seem to straighten. They gathered in the small living room. Evelyn tried to tidy the stack of bills on the table, but Carter gently gestured for her to leave them. He sat down, resting the envelope on his lap, and fixed his gaze on Marcus. "Son," Carter began, "yesterday you did something extraordinary. You gave away the only meal you had. Not because anyone asked, not because there was applause waiting, but because it was the right thing to do." Marcus shifted nervously, unsure what to say. His mother's eyes were wide, darting between them. Carter leaned forward slightly, his voice softening. "Acts like that don't go unnoticed. The world has a way of seeing when someone chooses kindness over comfort. That couple you helped, they're dear friends of mine. They told me everything." The old man, seated beside his wife, nodded with tears brimming in his eyes. "He gave us hope," the old man whispered. "When we had nothing." Marcus' cheeks flushed. He looked down at his hands, calloused from odd jobs, suddenly embarrassed by their roughness. "It wasn't much," he muttered. "Just a plate of food." Carter's expression sharpened, his words deliberate. "That is where you're wrong. It was everything. Because you gave away what you could not afford to lose. That kind of sacrifice is rare. And it tells me more about your heart than anything else ever could." The room fell into silence. Then Carter slid the envelope across the table. Marcus stared at it, confusion flickering in his eyes. "What's this?" Evelyn whispered, her voice quivering. "Open it," Carter said simply. Marcus reached out with trembling fingers. The paper was thick, the seal heavy. He tore it carefully and pulled out a stack of documents. His eyes widened as he tried to understand the words printed across the pages. Scholarship. Trust fund. Full tuition paid. "I don't," Marcus stammered, his voice breaking. He turned to his mother. "Mom?" Evelyn's hand flew to her mouth. Tears streamed down her cheeks before she could stop them. "Is this real?" Carter's gaze was steady. "It is very real. That envelope contains a full scholarship to any college you choose when the time comes." More than that, it holds a trust fund that will ensure your family never has to worry about food or bills again. The room seemed to spin. Marcus gripped the papers as though afraid they would vanish if he let go. His mind raced. College, something he had barely dared to dream about. A trust fund, enough to ease his mother's burden. It felt impossible, like a story that belonged to someone else. Why? Marcus asked finally, his voice small but raw. Why me? Carter leaned closer, his eyes burning with conviction. Because the world needs men who stand tall, even when they are hungry. You showed me yesterday that you are one of them. And when I see a spark like that, I do everything I can to make sure it never dies. The old couple clasped Marcus' hands, their gratitude spilling over in whispered blessings. Evelyn sobbed quietly, pressing her forehead against her son's shoulder. Marcus, overwhelmed, could only sit frozen, words caught in his throat. Carter rose to his feet, towering above the room. Marcus Green, remember this day. Not because of the money, not because of my name, but because of what your choice revealed. You proved that kindness can build bridges where wealth cannot. That strength is measured not by what you hold, but by what you let go. His words lingered in the air, heavy with truth. As he turned toward the door, Marcus finally found his voice, faint but filled with awe. Thank you, sir. Carter paused at the threshold, his hand resting on the knob. He looked back, a rare softness touching his stern features. Do not thank me, son. Thank yourself. Fate simply returned what you gave. The door clicked shut behind him, leaving Marcus and his mother in stunned silence. Marcus sat there, still holding the envelope, his heart thundering. His father's words echoed in his mind like a sacred vow. Real strength isn't what you keep, it's what you give. For the first time in years, the weight pressing on his chest seemed to lift. He had given away one meal, and the world had given him back a future. Outside, the town was just waking, unaware that within the small green household, destiny had just shifted. News travels differently in a small town. It does not need headlines, broadcasts, or flashing screens. It passes from one pair of lips to another, carried on whispers at grocery stores, murmurs in church pews, and conversations across fences. By the second day, Marcus' act of kindness was no longer just his story. It belonged to everyone. Neighbors who once walked past him without notice began to pause when he passed. Men at the hardware store nodded respectfully. Women at the bakery smiled warmly, their eyes softening in a way Marcus had not seen before. And the children at school, those who had once dismissed him as the boy with hole-ridden shoes, now whispered his name in hushed tones as though speaking about a legend. But Marcus himself did not change. He still rose early to do chores, still carried firewood for Mrs. Callahan down the street, still mowed lawns and swept porches for coins he no longer truly needed. The trust fund sat untouched in a bank account, far too large for him to even comprehend. His mother insisted they use it wisely, sparingly, not as a lifeline but as a promise of stability. For Marcus, it felt like a dream sealed away in an envelope, something he dared not break open too quickly. At school, teachers looked at him differently. His history teacher, Mr. Daniels, paused one morning before handing him back an essay. Marcus, he said quietly, the world remembers men like you. Keep that heart and you will write history yourself. The words burned in Marcus' mind, heavier than any grade could ever be. Yet admiration also brought challenges. Some boys in the hallway mocked him, not out of cruelty but envy. Hey hero, one sneered, feed us too, maybe a billionaire will show up. The laughter stung, but Marcus kept walking, his father's words ringing louder than their jeers. Real strength isn't what you keep, it's what you give. Still, the recognition carried burdens Marcus had never imagined. Adults spoke to him with an odd mixture of awe and expectation, as though he were no longer just a boy but a symbol of something greater. The local pastor asked him to speak at Sunday service about kindness. The principal suggested he consider leadership roles in school. And neighbors sometimes sent him food or gifts, leaving him embarrassed, unsure how to accept them. Marcus wrestled with it all in silence. He did not feel like a hero. He felt like a hungry boy who had made a choice. One evening, as he sat with his mother on the sagging couch, he voiced the thought that had been gnawing at him. Mom, he whispered, what if I cannot live up to what they think I am? Evelyn turned to him, her tired eyes shining with fierce love. Marcus, you are not meant to live up to their image. You are meant to live true to yourself. What you did was not for praise or for headlines. It was because you listened to your father's voice inside you. And that voice will never lead you wrong. Her words steadied him, but they also deepened his resolve. So Marcus decided that his kindness would not end with one plate of food. When the first snow fell in December, he organized a small drive at school, collecting old coats from families who could spare them and redistributing them to those who could not. When Mrs. Callahan's roof leaked during a storm, Marcus gathered 3 friends and patched it with tarps, refusing any payment. At the diner, where the story had begun, he often left coins in the jar near the counter to cover meals for strangers. And each time people looked at him not with pity but with respect. The ripple grew wider. One evening, Carter himself returned to town, attending a gathering at the community hall. The place buzzed with life, filled with neighbors eager to catch a glimpse of the millionaire who had taken interest in one of their own. Marcus stood quietly near the back, uncomfortable with the attention. But Carter called him forward, placing a hand firmly on his shoulder. "This boy," Carter said to the crowd, his voice echoing across the hall, "reminds us all of something simple. Wealth means nothing if it does not meet kindness. And kindness, no matter how small, can rewrite destinies." Marcus did not wait until he had more. He gave when he had nothing. That is true generosity. The hall erupted in applause. Marcus' cheeks burned, but his heart swelled with pride. He thought of his father again, of the man who had given every ounce of himself to family and neighbors alike. In that moment, Marcus realized he was not just his father's son, he was his father's legacy. Still at night, when the applause faded and the lights dimmed, Marcus remained the same boy who lay on a thin mattress under a patched roof. He still missed his father, still carried the ache of absence, still felt hunger at times despite the bank account. But alongside those struggles he carried something new, hope, bright and unyielding. One night, staring at the ceiling as the wind rattled the windows, Marcus whispered aloud, "Hunger passes. Love stays." The words tasted like truth, like a seed planted deep within him. He realized then that his act of sacrifice had not just changed his life. It had changed the life of the couple, the outlook of the town, and even the heart of a millionaire. It was as if one simple act had cracked open a door to something far greater than he could yet understand. In the weeks that followed, Marcus began to notice something extraordinary. People around him were kinder. Strangers held open doors more often, neighbors checked in on one another, and students at school shared lunches without hesitation. It was as if his small act had loosened the grip of silence that often bound the town. Kindness was multiplying. Marcus felt humbled, almost overwhelmed by it. Could one plate of food really ripple outward like this? Could one choice, born in hunger, bloom into a movement? The answer, he realized, was yes. Because generosity was never meant to end with one person. It was meant to pass forward, to ignite hearts like sparks catching on dry wood. And Marcus had been the spark. As winter deepened, he knew that fate was not finished with him. What had begun in the diner was still unfolding, reaching further than he could yet see. And somewhere deep inside, Marcus sensed that his journey was only beginning. Winter held the town in its grip, the kind of bitter cold that seeped through walls and settled deep in the bones. Marcus pulled his coat tight as he walked down Main Street, the snow crunching beneath his thin shoes. He passed the diner, that same small building where everything had changed, and for a moment he stopped to stare through the frosted glass. Inside, families huddled around steaming plates, laughter rising into the warm air. It struck him then. One choice, one meal, had become the seed of something larger than himself. When Marcus pushed open the diner's door, the bell jingled. Heads turned. Some nodded in recognition, others smiled quietly. The waitress, a woman with tired eyes and a gentle heart, came forward with a steaming mug of cocoa. "On the house," she said softly. Marcus thanked her and sat at the same corner booth. The warmth seeped into his hands, but his thoughts wandered back to his father. He imagined him seated across the table, nodding in that steady way he always had. "Real strength isn't what you keep, it's what you give." Those words had carried Marcus through hunger, through doubt, and now through the strange weight of being seen. As the days turned into weeks, Marcus began to dream beyond his small town. He spent evenings at the library, poring over books about science, engineering, and history. His scholarship promised him opportunities once unimaginable, but his heart knew those opportunities meant little unless he used them to lift others. He was determined never to forget the boy who had once gone hungry, the boy who had given away everything he had. One night, sitting by the fire with his mother, Marcus asked quietly, "Do you think Dad would be proud of me?" Evelyn's eyes shimmered. She reached out, cupping his face gently in her calloused hands. "Marcus, your father would see himself in you. Not because of what you received but because of what you gave. Pride isn't in wealth or fame. It's in the courage to be kind when kindness costs the most." Her words sank deep, filling the space his father had left behind. The community continued to ripple with change. Inspired by Marcus, the church began a weekly meal program for the elderly. The school formed a kindness club, where students volunteered their time for those in need. Even the local grocer, once known for his strictness, started donating bread to families who struggled. Marcus watched it all unfold, humbled that his simple act had lit a fire in so many hearts. But not every moment was easy. Sometimes, when the applause grew too loud or when expectations pressed heavy, Marcus longed for anonymity. He wanted to be just a boy again, to run down the street without whispers following him, to sit at his desk at school without teachers' eyes lingering in admiration. At those times, he reminded himself that he had not chosen kindness for recognition. He had chosen it because it was right. And that reminder kept him steady. One afternoon, William Carter returned to visit. He found Marcus repairing a fence outside his house, hammer in hand, sleeves rolled to his elbows. The millionaire watched quietly for a moment before stepping forward. "You could pay someone to do that, you know," Carter said with a half-smile. Marcus straightened, wiping sweat from his brow. "Maybe. But I like finishing what I start." Carter studied him for a long moment. "That's exactly why I believe in you. Money can build walls, Marcus, but only character builds bridges. Keep building them." The words stayed with Marcus long after Carter left. He realized that the gift he had received was not just financial security, it was belief. Belief from his mother, from his town, and from a man whose fortune meant nothing without people to inspire. Years later, when Marcus would look back on that winter, he would remember it not as the season when his fortune changed, but as the season when his purpose was born. He understood that kindness was not a single act. It was a way of living, a compass pointing always outward. His sacrifice at the diner had been small in the eyes of the world, but it had taught him the truth his father had always known, that giving was the greatest form of strength. That night, lying in bed, Marcus whispered once more into the darkness, "Hunger passes. Love stays." And in those words he felt the echo of every life his choice had touched, the old couple who regained their dignity, the mother who no longer carried the burden alone, the millionaire who rediscovered the meaning of wealth, and the town that remembered how to care. For Marcus, hope was no longer a flicker. It was a flame. And he knew with certainty that even the smallest sacrifice, offered in silence, could shake the walls of a world desperate for light.